Hello, everyone, and welcome to the X's and Dogs podcast. Today is December 9th, and we still have plenty of Browns news to talk about, which the one thing we can be thankful for when it comes to being a Browns fan is there's never dull moments. There's always things to talk about with this football team. And that certainly is the case with the current quarterback position, chances of, draft positioning, etc. Now, before we get into kind of those talking points, I want to start today's podcast by telling you guys thank you for watching if you have been so far. Letting you know I would appreciate a like, a subscribe. Let your friends know if you enjoy the podcast. We're growing this thing. We're still very new, but we're working very hard to get you guys great Browns content on a daily, weekly, gamely basis. So please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, tell your friends. Do what you got to do. Do what you feel comfortable doing. And I'll keep making great content for you guys. Now, if you guys are watching on YouTube, you are getting the video feed. And I got a new standing desk. So I'm trying today's podcast out standing. We'll see how I feel about it. We'll see if my legs and back are okay with standing and kind of moving around for 30-ish minutes. But, I think it's good for me to stand up, especially while doing podcasts and especially working all day in an office. It's nice to stand up. Anyway, that's enough about that. Let's get into some Browns topics for today's podcast. I want to start with just some injury news. Unfortunately, there were a couple new designations to the injured reserve list, and I believe it will keep both of these guys. It will definitely keep one of these guys out for the season, but I believe both of them actually will be done for the year. Obviously, Ethan Pocic got what we all feared, the torn Achilles injury that I believe will definitely, I should say, end his season here with the Browns, but in my opinion, more than likely will also probably end his career as a Cleveland Brown. So I think it is appropriate to say Ethan Pocic was a really good center for this team, gave us some very, very good moments over the past few years, and I think we can all be thankful for his time here. And Jerome Ford was also placed on injury reserve list, likely out for the season with a shoulder injury. So this one was a surprise. I think it was something that no one really knew after the game. But Jerome Ford is another guy whose future will be definitely questionable, particularly here with the Cleveland Browns. And, I think both of the young running backs have done enough to prove to the front office and the coaching staff that maybe they can just move forward with those guys and, maybe move off Jerome Ford, who I'm not entirely sure of his contract position right now, but more than likely he's going to be, wanting a little bit more money than that rookie contract that those other guys are on. So both of these guys, obviously, very disappointing injuries for the rest of this season and for themselves and their careers, but also some big question marks with their futures on the Browns. So some unfortunate news there. There also was other injuries in this game to Denzel Ward and Malachi Corley, both of which are still pretty up in the air. Kevin didn't really address either of those in his press conference yesterday. So we're still kind of waiting to hear more on that. Malachi Corley, I think there's a good chance he'll be out there next week, but here's my take on the Denzel Ward situation. Denzel Ward is, I believe, 30 or north of 30, right? Let me check Denzel Ward's age. Oh, so Denzel's actually only 28, so he's a little younger than I thought, but for a guy who's getting up there a little bit, approaching 30 years old with a calf injury at this point in the season, I'd be all on board for just shutting him down. I'm sure it's not going to be as simple as that. I'm sure he's a guy who wants to play the rest of the season here, but, like I said, for a guy who's approaching 30 years old, I want nothing to do, with playing around with an injured calf. All the risks with an Achilles injury there would be very, very damaging to this team in the future of this defense moving forward. You know, if God forbid Denzel did ever get an Achilles injury, I don't think anybody wants anything to do with that. So I would, if I'm the Browns, force Denzel to take his time getting back, maybe let him play in like the last game or two, but absolutely no reason to rush a calf injury at this point in the season where the Browns really aren't playing for anything and quite frankly are not don't have a negative view on losing games and getting a better draft pick. So look, got to be careful with this. Hopefully the Browns are able to make the right decision, and hopefully Denzel is able to make the right decision here and be very cautious with this thing. But that's kind of all for the injury news. I'm not sure if there's anyone else, on the roster that's dealing with anything, but we'll get more news on that, obviously, as we get closer to the game against the Bears this coming weekend. So I'll have more news on that, I'm sure, later on the week. Now we can honestly shift into the overall topics that I wanted to talk about in today's podcast. And there's some interesting ones here, and I wanted to start with, well, I guess I was reflecting on the Shedeur performance that we all saw against the Titans this past weekend, and kind of thinking more macro on the situation, not only in the future, but also in the past, and what we've seen so far this season. And my first thought really was the unfortunate reality of the waste of time that we, as Browns fans and as the Browns organization, spent with Dillon Gabriel. And I want to preface this by saying, I think Dillon Gabriel is a perfectly fine guy. I think he's done nothing wrong. Seems like a good dude. I'd maybe have a beer with him, but definitely not a fantastic NFL football player. I think that we know that from our 5-6 game sample size that we saw Dillon Gabriel play. And the greater point there is, well, I guess it's kind of two-headed. First off, the Browns front office and coaching staff picked this guy. This was the guy that they went into the 2025 NFL draft saying, this is the quarterback that we want to take a chance on this year. Albeit it was not the best quarterback draft. There wasn't all the top tier talent. But honestly, this was the guy that they decided to use a top 100 pick on. There were still really good players on the board. I remember draft night, Friday night, whenever the Browns drafted Dillon Gabriel, I remember still seeing some good guards on the boards, a couple of good safeties, pieces all around that the Browns could have definitely used. And they used that pick to draft the quarterback that they wanted to take a gamble on and they believed was a very good processor, one of those guys who just understood what defenses were throwing at him, understood the looks they were showing him, and had the ability to play in the NFL. Now, a lot of people also make the assumption, because we haven't heard this from anybody in the organization, that Dillon Gabriel was meant to be a backup quarterback. And I guess first off, to me, that's a very poor process, because who's drafting a quarterback in the third round thinking this is a long-term backup? You don't need to use a draft pick period to get a backup. There are guys you can claim for next to nothing in free agency to be a backup, because the way I look at it in all reality is that if you have to play your backup quarterback for a long extended period of time, like if your franchise quarterback goes out and you have to play your backup for a long period of time, your season is very likely going to go south. Like, we'll see what happens with the Colts this year, but to me, if the Colts were now investing, this past offseason, they decided to invest in a third round backup quarterback, which they of course didn't do. They would be in no better position after losing Daniel Jones. So, like, to me, that's just bad processing. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if that was the case. Now, the other side of it isn't much better, though, because then we get into the assumption that the Browns drafted Dillon Gabriel to be a potential starter for them this season, maybe next season, a bridge guy, who knows? And honestly, that might be worse because they could not have been more wrong. And I'm not here to write off Dillon Gabriel's career, but there were moments so bad in these games that Dillon played. Going along with his physical, his lack of just God-given attributes that most quarterbacks need to be successful in this league. Like, he's not tall. He has an okay arm. He doesn't have a fantastic arm. The thing is, he's not fast either. Like, he's not able to get out of the pocket and pick up some yards by scrambling or make something happen on the run. He's not able to do that either. He's a pretty slow dude whenever you watch him in game, especially in the NFL. And so, you put all these factors in, and apart from maybe I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's very smart. I'm sure on the whiteboard he's able to diagnose a whole bunch of hypothetical plays, and he was able to do that in the draft process, and the Browns fell in love with him that way. But when it comes to seeing this guy play on the NFL field on Sundays, it could not be more clear that he has a very low ceiling. Some would say not even a backup. Now, that's where I draw my line with Dillon. I think he showed enough to potentially be a pretty good backup in this league. But again, not worth a third round pick. And then we move into the other part of the situation, which has to do with Shedeur Sanders, who was in fact also on the board at, what was it, pick like it's like 94 or something. The Browns drafted Dillon. I forget right now, but it was in the 90s, I'm pretty sure. And so obviously Shedeur was available at that pick. The Browns wanted a quarterback, and they actively chose to go with Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders. And it's clear they liked him more, thought he was a better quarterback, because from that moment forward, until the concussion that Dillon got against the Baltimore Ravens, he was clearly put on a pedestal over Shedeur Sanders. And all we heard was, Shedeur doesn't know the playbook. He can't even grab a football. He doesn't have the basic skills to be an NFL quarterback. Like, he's just not there yet. He needs to redshirt year. And then, like we all knew would happen at some point, because this is the Cleveland Browns, Shedeur gets thrusted in there against Baltimore, albeit looks pretty bad, struggles. So the people who thought at that moment, Shedeur is not an NFL quarterback, they were able to have their victory laps for that week. Then we see the Raiders game, followed by the 49ers game, which wasn't great. Then we have the Tennessee game, and it's 3 games in. And I think we can all just come to the conclusion that after only 3 games, Shedeur Sanders is currently right now a better quarterback than Dillon Gabriel. If you disagree with me, feel free to let me know why, and we can have that conversation in the comments or however you want to do it. But to me, it couldn't be more clear that Shedeur is in fact the more NFL ready quarterback. You could make the argument that from what was it, 8 months that Shedeur's been in Berea, he became suddenly NFL ready. But in my opinion, he probably was a better quarterback when on draft night. He probably was a better quarterback in training camp when the vast majority of beat reporters were saying that Shedeur made all the best throws in comparison to Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel was completing, and I know these are training camp moments that take it with a grain of salt, but that's the first moment you start to see guys and their ability to be what they can be in the NFL. So it's just the first chance you get to see them. And then we saw Dillon in the 5 games, and it followed along with kind of what we saw in training camp, where he's not able to throw the ball down the field. He's taking all these check downs, and the supercomputer that he's supposed to be maybe isn't so realistic. And I say all of this to just circle back to the point that what a big waste of time, but not only time, draft capital by the the Cleveland Browns front office, coaching staff, whoever it was that made the decision to go out there, draft Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round with a top 100 pick, and have him playing meaningful games this season. And I do want to say, I don't believe that Kevin Stefanski truly wanted or expected Dillon Gabriel to have to start as early as he did in this season. I think that the Kenny Pickett injury kind of just threw everything out the window, the whole plan that they had. And to me, I think they made a rash decision to trade Kenny Pickett because they are so obsessed with these trades on the margins to getting 4th, 5th round picks, and that's just how Andrew Berry is. So they made that rash decision to go out there, move on from him, roll with Joe Flacco, who, is 41 years old and can barely move. So, of course, there's always a real possibility that we're going to have to see Dillon Gabriel really soon. So I think that whole situation was not expected necessarily by Kevin, wasn't part of the initial game plan, but unfortunately was where the reality lies or lied in that situation. So overall, I think whoever had the most say in the Dillon Gabriel saga and situation here in Cleveland should have a real negative mark on their resume, because that's a very questionable decision, and it leads to bigger question marks with this front office and coaching staff, which is to me why I really do believe that it's best to just move on from everybody this offseason. And I've been pretty strong on that on this channel. I've said it many times. I think Kevin can be a good coach. I don't think he's going to be a good coach here in Cleveland anymore. And I guess the thing is the Haslams know who was the one that made that decision with Dillon Gabriel. Because if Kevin was the one slamming his fist on the table saying, this is a guy that it's a steal in the 3rd round, we need him, he can be a good quarterback for us, which the reports tend to lean that way, frankly, then he should be the one who has to take that negative hit. If Andrew Berry's the one that thought he was a steal in that round, then he should be the one to take the negative hit. The thing I will say about Andrew Berry, though, is he was able to have a fantastic draft other than that. And that's why I'm a little more hesitant to move on from Andrew Berry, because of a potential franchise-altering draft that he was able to put together. And those are just my thoughts on the Dillon Gabriel situation. And I think it's only taken 3 games to have these thoughts already. Watching Shedeur play for this football team. And we'll have to see. Maybe this all goes out the window. Maybe Shedeur reverts back to his bad habits and starts to play the type of football that I think a lot of the NFL scouts more expected him to play. But I think that that's unlikely. And we'll find out, though. That's the best part about this situation. We will find out. There's 4 more games left. And it actually leads right into my next topic. I do want to talk about Shedeur. More specifically, though, I want to talk about what is Shedeur's best path forward, I should say. Ooh. Open that back up. What is Shedeur's best path forward to being the starting quarterback in 2026? And here's where I lie on that situation. First off, I think the easiest solution for Shedeur is just win a couple games. And there's a few reasons built into that idea. First off, we're playing 4 playoff teams. 3 of them will realistically make the playoffs. But I think if Joe Burrow was healthy all year, the Bengals are also a playoff team. I think we can find common ground on that. So regardless of how you see the Bengals, 4 very competitive football teams. So in order to beat these teams, Shedeur is going to have to play good. Like, our offense is going to have to score points to beat these teams. All of these teams can score points. And, one of them has Josh Allen. One of them's the Steelers, who we always struggle with, albeit it's at home. So I think he'd have to play good in those games. But additionally, we know wins lower our draft pick. It's seeming more and more likely after this weekend, and almost assuredly, that Ty Simpson's not going to come out. So that leaves really Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. Dante Moore is even a question mark. Like, I think it really is still up in the air with him. It's going to come down to how he plays in the postseason and the college football playoffs. So, like, if he goes out there and plays like crap and Oregon loses in the first round, which I don't expect them to do, but let's say that happens, is he for sure going to come out? I don't know. There's already reports out there that he wants to go back to Oregon for another year. So it's probably going to have to be a clear decision for him to go to the NFL in order for that to be the route he chooses. So put those 2 things together. Like, he has to play well, and it lowers our draft position. I think that really results in the best case scenario, in the best situation, most likely situation, that Shedeur ends up being the starter for 2026. And for me, that's the Browns' best case scenario. And that's if you are somebody who is obsessed with college quarterbacks and always thinks that, the next quarterback is better than the current one, maybe you disagree with that. Maybe you think that Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore are truly worth trading both first-round picks to go up and get. I'm not someone who buys into that belief, but if things go really south here and Shedeur starts to play like crap to end the season, I could easily be convinced. Well, I guess, it's also similar. It's also kind of a similar situation in the fact that if Shedeur plays like crap, we're almost definitely going to lose all 4 of these games. So in that case, very likely will have third, second, or even first pick in this draft. And then we'll have the opportunity to just draft the quarterback without even trading anyone. So, whenever you look at the Browns situation here, just zooming out from the Shedeur Sanders point of view, because, we're Browns fans. Like, we're not only Shedeur fans. We all love Shedeur. We hope he turns into the quarterback. At least I do. I think it would be fantastic for the city of Cleveland to have a star like Shedeur, and fantastic for the Browns fan base to kind of regain the popularity in the football team that has really lost so much over the past few decades of just nonstop losing. But it's a good situation for the Browns to be in, because either Shedeur wins games, shows you he can be a potential franchise quarterback, looks good. We say, screw the quarterback. We're going to draft a wide receiver. We're going to draft Carnell Tate. We're going to draft Jordan Tyson. We're going to go out there and get, whatever tackle later on in the first round with our second pick, and then, build out the offense with the remaining picks. Maybe mix in some defensive players here and there, but to me, that is just the most ideal situation for this Browns team. And it really starts with being able to win games or being able to look really good in losses. Now, on the other hand, if Shedeur looks bad, we'll probably end up being in a good enough draft spot to where we don't really have to give up too many assets to get one of those quarterbacks that everybody seems to believe in the 2026 draft. So I think the way things are shaping out for the Browns to end the season here are actually pretty favorable in comparison to teams like the Titans, who, have a number 1 overall pick invested in the guy who they're not 100% sold on yet. So they're going to be picking really, really early again, and they're going to be tempted with the opportunity to go out there and get one of these quarterbacks, but they have Cam Ward on their roster, so they're stuck with a really hard decision. The Jets, who are probably going to be just outside of that Fernando Mendoza, Dante Moore range. So more than likely, as a team who has 3 first-round picks next year, are going to kick that can down the road and get a quarterback in 2027. There's also the Giants, who have Jackson Dart, who, has shown real flashes, but also shown kind of some injury scares. And is he going to be able to stay healthy? I just think the Browns will at the end of the season have a much clearer picture of the best route to choose than some of these other teams. And I think that could really play into the Browns' favor and gives them the ability to turn things around much quicker than maybe some of these other franchises who are struggling just like the Browns are. Hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. To me, I'm excited about where the Browns are at. I don't really have any interest in winning any more games this season, unless it has to do with Shedeur balling out. Like, if Shedeur starts balling out, we can win a couple games because I'm sold on Shedeur at that point. Like, if Shedeur goes into, let's say Shedeur goes into Chicago, beats the Bears, comes back home, probably it's going to be really tough to beat the Bills, the way they're kind of starting to turn things on for the playoffs here. But let's say he beats the Steelers, which is pretty realistic. We always play the Steelers tough at home. So he beat the 10-4 Bears, and then he beat the division leading Steelers. I think we're starting to look at we're starting to think we might have something here at that point. And I think we'll all be excited moving on with Shedeur, as the potential quarterback. So yeah, like a really interesting situation in Cleveland, and kind of the way the cards will just fall into place, I think, over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And even additionally on top of that, we get to see how these college quarterbacks will perform in huge moments in the college football playoff, which will just make the decision even easier for the Browns because there's more evidence, more tape on these guys in really, really high leverage, crucial moments against good teams. It's I think it's intriguing, and I think, like I said, the cards are going to just fall in, whatever manner they will, and the Browns will have a clear picture. Yes, the coaching staff will make things harder. Do they keep Kevin? Do they keep Andrew Berry? But to me, just forget about that part of it for a second and focus on the players and the quarterback and think about how the Browns could have a real chance to turn things around quickly. I'm being an optimist today. We love it. We're 3-10. Got to keep the optimism high going into the end of the season here. And it'll be a very, very important offseason for this football team. They need to get things turned around quick with that stadium coming due. The city wants, the Haslams won a lot of money from the city and the Cleveland natives, and they want a lot of money for tickets in that stadium. So they got to have a product together in just a few years. Very interesting. That's all the topics I have for today's podcast. As I talked about earlier, if you are enjoying, if you have Browns fans who are friends, let them know. If you have Browns fans who are family, let them know that you're enjoying watching this podcast and you think it's good content, and I'll continue making it for you guys. But as always, enjoy the rest of your week. I'll be back with you once again before the Chicago Bears game. Then I'll be with you on the post-game show after that game on Sunday. So thank you all for watching. I will see you in the next podcast. Bye-bye.